Welcome back to another episode of With Sonar. I'm your host, Luke Falasca. We are, of course, joined by Tony Mulvey. Tony, it's great to have you back here yet again. And Tony, we've got a very special episode here today.
We do indeed.
Very special episode here. I hope we're talking about the same things, because otherwise that could be a little confusing. But anyways, no, we've got an excellent episode today. We're talking about we're going to be covering about bids and how bid cycles have changed in the timeline of that. I'm very excited. And while we could sit up here and talk about that a lot, we're going to be joined by a special guest, Kyle Jepson, who's the Senior VP of Product over at Emerge shortly. But before we bring Kyle on here to talk about some of that, Tony, I want to just talk. When people hear bid, kind of what's the nature of the thought process?
Yeah, I think when you think bid, the traditional RFP, right? That pricing, and you're talking on an annual basis. Those contracts on an annual basis, and what we've seen, really, a pandemic kind of spurred it on, where, hey, maybe shorter bids, that more dynamic pricing, make a little more sense. We've seen the run up in contract rates and spot rates on the way up, right? Now we're seeing it on the way down as well. So this is where those shorter bids, that dynamic pricing can kind of, both on the carrier and shipper side, what we're seeing. You can kind of get some of those give and take. Yeah.
Something I want to bring up. We'll dive into some sonar data later in the show, but I do want to bring up one chart before then. It's our CAS index. Now, a lot of folks are familiar with CAS. It's not a data set that's necessarily proprietary to Freightways, but it is in Sonar. And one thing that's unique, I think, about the CAS index, there's a lot of history there. We'll get it pulled up here in just a second, but it's got a lot of history, and you can see a lot of different freight cycles with it. And there it is, right there. So what I want to draw attention to here, this isn't really the real-time aspect of data. That's not really what this index is designed to show. But I've got 3 different time periods that are circled, okay, or ellipsed, or whatever you call those. The circle all the way on the left there, that's kind of that mid-2000s boom that we saw leading up until 2008. That was a lot of folks consider that one of the biggest heydays of the trucking market, or some folks do. A lot of folks, I wasn't around in the industry during that time, so I can't really speak much to it. But during that time, early 2000s up until 2008, the trucking market there, you see that cycle. That was a massive boom in the market. Then you kind of have the next cycle there, that middle circle there. And that's really that, 2010 to like 2016 time period. I think a lot of folks who are in the industry now, that's kind of been a lot of their experience. Very steady. You can see there, it's very steady. You have a little bit of a cyclical nature there, but for the most part, you know where those bottoms are, you know where those tops are. And then you get into the most recent circle now, which is really 2018 to like now. And we've seen some crazy highs, we've seen some crazy lows, the volatility is totally different. So I think when we talk to a lot of folks about the market, this is where a lot of folks say, hey, this is what the market typically does. And it's like, that may have been true, but that cycle might be gone. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what this picture, that's the takeaway from here is like, the industry's gone through a lot of different cycles, and it's more a question of where do we come out in this cycle?
Yeah, Zach Strickland actually had this exact chart this morning in a carrier update talking about this CAS data, and you look at that 2010 to 2016 range, and it's kind of, as he put it, it's kind of like that, like an EKG, right? Yeah. At the doctor's office. It's pretty normal, pretty steady. You've got your ebbs and flows. And then you get into 2020, and really even 2018 into 20 to now, right? The boom and bust is a lot bigger now than it was just that 2010 to 2016. Yeah. So
and more unpredictable too.
Yeah.
And we don't boom and bust to the same levels.
Yes, and it's not just that, it's, I guess not pain felt on both sides, but on the up and down, there a lot more to gain. The risk reward's a lot bigger now, right? Instead of before, it was kind of in this kind of fixed range, and now it's kind of blown out on both sides from what you would think would be in that normal range that we saw in 2010 to 2016.
That's a great point. I think this is a great time. Let's transition here. We're going to bring in Kyle Jepson here again. He's the senior VP of product over at Emerge, and Kyle's actually been on the show before, so we're excited to have him back here. And Kyle, hey Kyle, are you with us here on the line?
I am. Yes. How's it going, gentlemen?
Fantastic. Glad to have you here. And I'm already I'm a dad now, and I said on the line instead of online with us, so we're just going to move past that one. But anyways, Kyle, thanks for joining us here. First off, why don't we just kind of for maybe some viewers who weren't familiar with you last time, can you give us just kind of like the 30-second overview of Emerge? We're very familiar with Emerge. I know your customers are, but maybe for those who aren't as familiar, who is Emerge?
Yeah, so Emerge is changing the way that freight is procured in the United States. Fundamentally, we are building products for shippers and carriers to better manage procurement, from the spot quoting platforms to our RFP platforms. In addition to that, we also help carriers source new capacity through our marketplace. So trying to ultimately create tools to streamline operations for shippers, for carriers, and bring them together in a marketplace.
Awesome. That's great. And it kind of ties into the theme, right, that we've talked about really for the past few years. And it's becoming even more of a talking point just in the past couple weeks, is the shorter bid cycle, right? And shorter bid processes. I mean, you're starting to see it almost become the norm, especially like on the way up. You kind of talked about it carriers liked it because they could get higher rates on contract. They don't have to reject as many, and it kept their trucks moving. While on the downside, or on the downward movement of a freight cycle, right? Shippers like these shorter bid cycles because pricing's dynamic, right? It's changing to market conditions. What do you think? Why do you think these shorter bid cycles are a good thing in the freight industry?
Yeah, well, volatility is here to stay, right? We've seen a lot of volatility over the last 24, 36 months. Shorter bid cycles really help both shippers and carriers better predict what's going to happen, right? Depending on the characteristics of the freight, the market conditions, or the lane conditions, it may or may not make sense to do shorter bid durations, really depending on kind of your network and how to optimize that. So there's a lot of opportunities for shippers and carriers to work better together, create more efficiencies, and really drive more value working together by running these shorter bid cycles. You're avoiding some of the volatility. You're able to predict with the data, things like sonar, for example, really help shippers see what's going on in the market so that they can react to that.
Kyle, from your perspective, right, are these shorter bid cycles seem to be coming up a lot more. Are they here to replace these annual bids that we see, or can they work in tandem together? And is there a strategy for that?
Yeah, I really see them working in tandem together, right? Annual events are still going to occur. Shippers have freight that's consistent throughout the year, and that makes sense to put it into an annual event. You want to lock the carriers in, you want to be consistent with that. If you've got the peaks in seasonality, the valleys in that, and or there's seasonality in those lanes, sometimes it's going to make sense to run shorter bids or really optimize your network based on those lane trends, your volatility in your network, and ultimately what you forecast in terms of your supply. So really, I think they're here to supplement those annual bids in a way that benefits both parties. No more am I just going to average out the total number of lanes that I ran last year and put that into my bid. I can start to better understand the data and analytics behind that, see what is my consistent freight, put that out into an annual bid, and then break up those seasonal trends into these mini bids or smaller bids that don't leave carriers thinking they're going to be receiving tenders, never getting anything, and ultimately walking away.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point there right at the end, talking about these carriers expecting freight, right, and not getting it, and then they just flow into the spot market, which is obviously extremely volatile, as we've seen just in the past 6-8 weeks. So going through these shorter bid cycles, like what benefits do carriers really get? I mean, I get both sides of it, right? Mm-hmm. You kind of get the removing of that volatility, but how does that impact a carrier when they're running that shorter bid that, hey, maybe rates are going down, but we want the annual rate that we agreed to, say, 6 months ago?
Really, I think it's more predictability for the carriers, right? If the freight is never going to materialize because the shipper is going to go to the spot market, Until we really have binding contracts, both sides have to ride the market on the ups and the downs. So those shorter contracts help you lock in a rate, get secured capacity or demand, I guess in that case for the carriers. So more predictability, it's guaranteeing you're going to see those tenders come to fruition and building stronger relationships on both sides.
Have you had any experience yet here, Kyle, with either side being more eager to get into shorter bids? Are shippers kind of driving that right now? Is it carriers, or is it a mutual discussion coming to the table?
We've seen a lot more from the shipper side. Really, we've watched the market kind of going up, right? Shippers didn't want to lock in those long-term contracts because they didn't want to fix themselves into these rates. So really, it's being driven on the shipper side. I think we're going to see the counter side of that now, where carriers might be more interested in this because they don't know where prices are going to go. So I think both sides are going to start to see the normalcy that volatility is here. And how do we work through that volatility together in a way that doesn't lock one of us into something that's not going to make sense 3-6 months from now? Especially, as I said, in those lanes where there's just not consistency. If it's consistent, you can ride those waves, but when there's volatility there, it's a lot harder.
Yeah, I think, again, that goes kind of back into what carriers really want. Is they want consistent freight that keeps them moving, because that's how they make money when they're loaded, right? So, yeah, I mean, how does both the carrier and shipper kind of know when to run these mini bids, like in the year? Like, is it just a short-term blip that, hey, maybe it's a week of volatility in the market? Like, or is it, hey, we've seen a monthly trend or 2-month trend now, let's start reevaluating to go into maybe a shorter bid cycle?
Yeah, I'd say really it's the shippers' demand forecasts, right? What do they see that is going to come in from seasonality? There's the overall market demand, supply and demand in and out of markets for seasonal trends. And companies like Freightways with the Sonar product are bringing for the first time the ability to make real-time decisions a lot faster than you could before. I'd say previously you had to wait a month, 2 months into a cycle to be prompted to do that. At this point, using things like Sonar, you're able to get insight into that and respond a little bit quicker, run that bid maybe in a weekly or even within a month of those cycles starting to occur.
Kyle, thinking of flipping to the other side of the equation here and looking at the operational side of it, right? So I have a lot of conversations with shippers here today, and and as I'm sure you do as well. And a common reoccurring theme I hear come up a lot is, hey, we love the idea. We want to be able to take advantage of some of that volatility. We understand it's here to stay, but some of these shippers, it can be very taxing to run an RFP. Where does as we get into this process of maybe running more RFPs or mini bids, right? What do those solutions look like from the shipper's perspective to kind of who may not have the staffing and the infrastructure to really run those on a consistent basis?
Yeah, I'd say tools are changing today. The technology that's available to run mini bids to support these events, quickly, easily, and in a streamlined manner is actually here. Companies like Emerge and a few others out there are bringing these to the table and opening this up so that it can be done by shippers. Legacy RFP products were incredibly cumbersome. They're quite powerful, but they're very difficult to operate, to administer, and to run those events. So the things like Emerge is doing with our ability to, lowest cost optimization, even constraint-based optimization, the ability to quickly create those bids and put those out to your network is really here for the first time that we've seen in the last couple of years. So the tools have come a long way, and the technology that allows us to do that without the administration that some of these larger annual RFPs take.
What's that? Is there sort of an approximate? I know everybody's a little bit different, but is there an approximate? Like when you guys are working through a bid with a shipper, like is there a certain amount of like time that you often see that you guys are able to compress that bid compared to maybe more of traditional legacy products?
Yeah, I mean, on the mini bid side, we see people who are running monthly or quarterly bids in less than a 24-hour window, right? From creation to ultimately awarding those
That's
and
quick.
ending that.
Yeah.
So that that's on the faster side. We're seeing the average I'd say is about a week to run an event for a monthly or quarterly is what we tend to see now.
Yeah.
However, when we were talking to shippers 1-2 years ago, we're seeing that, annual events are taking sometimes up to, 6 months to plan, a month to get the carriers in there, and then a month to analyze that.
Yeah.
So we've been able to reduce that for the most part, not the planning phase. That's something the shippers are still struggling with, but the actual execution of the bid is something that you can do very easily. And most of our shippers are even able to run an annual event in less than 3 weeks.
That's awesome. And you touched on data, right? That some of these shippers and carriers are kind of missing, or they don't necessarily take advantage of when going through a bid cycle. How is that advantageous? Like, you understanding the data and basically being able to play the volatility kind of in their favor throughout these the mini bids, and then even an annual bid.
Yeah, so I'd say traditionally these tools, there's been a lot of data available in our industry. The ability to analyze, synthesize, and come up with actionable insights from that has really been the hardest part. That's a major focus of a lot of the tools, and where I really see the majority of the industry moving from an analytics standpoint is not only showing you the data, but helping give you the recommendations on what you can do. How long to go to bid, what lanes to go to bid, and ultimately what price you should start to expect from those. So I think the real-time nature of the data and the ease to receive suggestions on what to do with that data are starting to change that and make it a lot more actionable for both sides.
Yeah, I think it's that actionable stuff it's really important, because I know shippers, as big as a lot of them are, have had a lot of historic data, but it's all been kind of, what do I do with it? And how do I kind of take it ingest their own data and know how to use it, but then also ingest outside data to kind of either confirm what they're seeing or change their course of action. So, Kyle, how can people learn more about Emerge and all the things that you all are doing throughout these shorter RFPs and through the whole freight procurement process?
Yeah, they can visit us at emergemarket.com. We're also going to be at the FreightWaves conference and the Gartner conference. So anyone who's out there, feel free to stop by or reach out to us on the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kyle, so much for joining us.
Yep. And you heard it from Kyle himself. He's buying everybody drinks at Future of Supply Chain. That's what I heard. So
Emergeritas.
We might need to get an official drink named after that. That might be. We might need to put a few concoctions together. Talk to the bartenders there. See if there's something they can work up.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kyle, for joining us today. I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon on With Sonar.
Take care, Kyle.
Great.
Thanks for dropping some wisdom.
Great stuff there.
Great stuff. Absolute rock star. I was incredibly impressed. I mean, he talked. He's so true, right? It's one thing to have all of this data, and I know everybody. Sonar does obviously an incredible job of providing the data. But he talked about how do you execute on that, and a lot of these shippers, they're not really designed to have the bandwidth to really digest it, or to be super nimble. And the fact that they can go through an execution process of a bid in as quick as 24 hours in some cases, or even a week on kind of the slower end, that's really remarkable.
Yeah, I mean it's this legacy process that, like you said, it's taken months before. I mean, you take a month to put it out, a month to analyze it. Well, if you can condense that into a week or 3 weeks. I mean, 3 weeks. Yeah. If you condense 2 months of work into 3 weeks or even a month, you've cut that work in half.
Yeah. I mean, imagine how much labor you can now redistribute to more meaningful tasks.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. I mean, that's the key. It's exciting. I wanted to, as we kind of pivot here, I wanted to give a little update into where the market is here. We've been talking a lot about the softening in the freight market, particularly the truckload market, and we're talking about a freight recession coming. Still seems like that's the play that's happening. Of course, things could change, but as of right now, it still seems to be the trend that's taking place. But what's really remarkable is Tony, I've talked to a lot of people, and they're like, hey, busy season's going to come here. Reefer's really going to pick up as that busy season arrives, but that really hasn't been the case. In fact, Reefer is actually quite underperformed. It's gotten even worse.
Yeah.
Let's throw up a chart here real quick of some of the volumes that we've been looking at. And I mean, seriously, your mind's going to be blown here. So blue line is 1 year as of this morning, van volumes. We've seen that 100 times. Okay, nothing new there. A little bit of a blip there. That might be some Easter support we're getting. Either way, it's always nice. If you're on the carrier side, it's nice to see the bleeding to kind of, reside a little bit, but we'll see if it maintains or if it's just a little relief rally. That green line, though, those are reefer volumes. Those are reefer volumes. They're on the left axis. Tony, what do you make of those reefer volumes there? I mean, a new 1-year low made today, this morning.
So it doesn't necessarily surprise me when you think about reefer volumes and you've seen reefer rejections. You kind of look back. Reefer rejections up 40%, at around that 40% mark for much of the past year. Well, now they're down into the mid-teens.
Sure.
And so, I mean, you're definitely seeing improved carrier compliance, a lot more things moving under contract. I think what's important to remember with like produce season approaching, you don't really get, it's not a lot of contracted freight.
Yeah.
It's a lot of spot freight. And really what you would see is kind of like an uptick in rejection rates, which can kind of artificially inflate reefer volumes around produce season. And you really haven't seen that happen yet. So you're seeing a lot more in that contracted reefer market as opposed to produce, that spot market produce that you see kind of pop up. I mean, you've got Mother's Day coming up in what, 10 days?
Yeah.
11 days, right before we go to future supply chain there in Northwest Arkansas.
It's a little reminder for all you people out there who still haven't gotten your mother a present yet.
So
Tony here's reminding you.
So flowers, and then you've got produce as well. And a lot of that stuff, I mean, what's interesting is you're not seeing the rejection rate pick up. You are seeing some slight tightening in a market like a Lakeland, Florida.
Right.
But reefer rejections are still like 6% in the market. So it's not like they're surging
still falling.
Yeah, I mean, they're still remarkably low for what you would think, hey, we're getting a lot of produce is here, it's starting to go out. Well, we're almost through April and it really hasn't shown up in the data.
What it really kind of begs the question for me is, you know, since you're right, a lot of that produce stuff tends to move on the spot market. It's very quick, get it out. What it seems to be telling me is shippers just have less of an urgency. It's like, you know what, it can move via contract. It's not as urgent to get it there tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's okay if it takes a day or two extra. And that's, I think, what's really kind of throwing this market, you know, into a bit of a tizzy.
Yeah, and it's the van side too. I mean, it's not just subject to the reefer side. I mean, the van side, you start looking at volumes. Yeah, we kind of had this, like, as Zach alluded to this morning, this Easter basket kind of, this lull, and then we've kind of bounced back slightly. But look at accepted volumes over the past year. They're still negative, even with this little slight uptick. Rejection rates under, what? Under 10%,
about 9.5%.
Very quickly approaching under 9%.
Yeah.
And guess what?
Those levels in a long time.
Oh, yeah, what, 2020 on the up?
Yeah, about 22 months or so.
Yeah, and then you've got spot rates down another 8 cents per mile this week.
Let's go ahead and throw that chart up
so
there.
we'll pull up the chart. It's got our van contract rate in blue and our truckstop.com national spot rate or dry van spot rate in the orange line.
Right.
And obviously you see the drastic decline there in the spot rate. I mean, that's, when we were talking about the softening trend, it's really been isolated to the spot market, right? I mean, rejections and ultimately falling contracted volumes, it happens in the spot market first, right? So those falling rejections show less spot market activity. Less spot market activity means lower rates. That's kind of what we're seeing here with rates falling. But what's interesting is we've seen kind of this hiccup in contracted rates. Yeah. I think that's worth noting because this is really early April that we're seeing because those contract rates are reported on a 14-day lag. So we're looking back, I mean, we're talking right before Easter, right? Yeah. Right before we see this kind of real blip in the in volumes and then that back up this week. So that's not even priced in yet. So it's
really
kind of interesting
makes you ask
that you're
the question of, you know, like Kyle said earlier, are shippers already beginning to try to rebid maybe certain parts of the network? Maybe not the whole network, but maybe certain isolated pieces where it's like, listen, like spot rates they're so far below contract on certain lanes they are. Yeah. Not all lanes. Some lanes spot rates are still way above contract, but on certain lanes, if you're a shipper.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard anecdotally that shippers they're going through a bid and it gets done. I mean, they finish a bid and then as soon as they're finishing, they're ready, or they're wanting to go to a second tier bid or a third tier, just kind of prolong it because they know rates are falling. And if they can push out this bid cycle even maybe like a shorter bid cycle, right? They accept it and start implementing it, but they're ready to go for the next one. Just a really short one can kind of take advantage of the lower rates lowering.
Spot on. So I think we're running out of time here, folks. But I think it's been a great episode. Obviously, we're continuing to see the bid cycles continue to develop. A lot of them are shortening there. Companies like Emerger helping execute a lot of that stuff. Obviously, we've looked at the sonar data and we've seen the freight cycles are changing. Right, they're beginning to get more volatile and violent. It's really going to be an interesting market to see how things evolve over the next couple of weeks. So look forward to seeing you guys next Wednesday live, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you next week.